Hey guys, so my tomato plants are looking great this year. These were all started from seed inside the greenhouse, and there's one thing I added to each plant before I put it into the ground, or right around the root zone of each plant, and that's this little pill right here and a few other ingredients. And it is really a miracle pill, keeping your tomato plants healthy, surviving, and producing lots of tomatoes. So let's head into the greenhouse and I'll show you exactly how to make this terrific mix up. It only takes a few minutes and it will make all the difference when you're growing tomatoes. But it not only applies to tomatoes, you can apply this to peppers, squash, many other transplants in your vegetable garden. So guys, I'm going to do my best to do this in 10 minutes or less because I have been accused of rambling from time to time. And this is a super simple recipe, so it shouldn't take that long for me to explain to you. But this particular tomato plant I've used this recipe on, and it's shown some really great success. I've transplanted it from one of the tiny little cells that I have growing behind me in the greenhouse over the end of winter into this pot, and it's grown quite well. No signs of stress or disease. I'll give you a close-up of there, but I'm going to tell you several things that this recipe does. From this one simple little peel right here, it makes a huge difference. Now there are a couple of other additives in there with it, but the main component of today's recipe is this pill. Now this tomato plant is quite healthy, and it has been transplanted, like I said, from one of the small cells I started it in. But what to expect with this particular recipe is you're going to see reduced transplant shock. You're just going to stimulate rapid root regeneration from its small cell that it was growing in into this larger pot, and eventually it's going to go out into the open area of the garden in one of my raised beds. But it's also going to improve nutrient uptake, support soil microbial activity, and overall it's going to help the plant recover faster from stress, heat, drought, and even damage, whether it's through strong wind, breaking a limb, or anything like that. So this recipe does all of those things for your tomato plants, as well as your peppers, your cucumbers, anything you're transplanting from a seedling tray, from the mega store where you may have bought a transplant. It's going to help all of those plants, and it is super cheap to make and easy to put together. Now this recipe has 3 items, and 4 if you count water, and water is a very important component of this recipe, or any of my recipes. I always recommend to not use chlorinated tap water. If you must, you can set it out and let it degas some of the chlorination, but sometimes there's other things added to water and some things that are just naturally found in our tap water. So I would recommend having a very high quality filter, or do what I do, just have a rain catch. I've got one right off the end of the greenhouse where I can catch all the pure clean rainwater coming off the roof of the greenhouse. So you just want to remember that you want to use the cleanest water possible. Even if you have to purchase spring water, if you have a small garden, it shouldn't be too much of an expense for you there. So again, just use the cleanest possible water possible and avoid chlorinated or fluorinated water if at all possible. So that's part 1 of our 4-part recipe here. Now the next 2 ingredients is going to be 1 tablespoon of molasses, and a lot of people say, why not just use regular sugar? Well, molasses has a lot of minerals in it, and it's included in a lot of my recipes. So this particular brand, I'll put a link in the description. If you can't find molasses at your local grocery store, you can order this online. And then you want 1 teaspoon of apple cider vinegar. Any brand is fine. Also always recommend make sure you shake it, because sometimes it will separate some of the really good components that are going to go into our recipe. So shake before use. And the molasses, don't store it in the refrigerator because it can become a little bit on the thick side and be a little bit hard to work with. The last and the most important ingredient is a natural multi-B vitamin, and I always recommend using a capsule that you can pull apart. You don't have to crush it, but if you don't have a capsule type, you can use a hard one. You'll just need to take a mortar and pestle and break it down into a very fine powder. You can't just throw it into the mix and hopefully it'll dissolve. No, I think it's better to get this in its powdered form. So again, I always go with the capsule, but if you don't have the capsule, just crush a hard multi-B vitamin into a very fine powder, and then you can add it to the formula. Now one more note about your multivitamin: make sure that it's B1, B2, B6, and B12 all included in your multi, and it can have other mixtures in there with it as well, but those 4 are the most important. So again, I'll put a link in the description to the particular one I use because I like it so much, because it is a capsule. I can just pull the capsule apart and just add it to our water and our other ingredients there. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put my vitamin B1 powder into roughly about 1 cup of lukewarm water, and this is the water that I told you about. It is rain catch water. We're going to throw the capsule portion away, and so we just want to take our B vitamin out. And now I'm going to take my stir stick, which is just a paint stick. I love getting these from the paint store because I have so many uses for them in the garden. I can use these as stir sticks. I can use them as plant identification tags. I can write the name of the plant, stick it in the soil, and they'll last for 2 or maybe 3 seasons. So the first thing you want to do is you want to dissolve the powder in some lukewarm water and just make sure you give it a good stir. Next, we're going to add our apple cider vinegar, 1 teaspoon. We want to make sure we don't overdo the apple cider vinegar because it could be detrimental to our plant. And then next we're going to add 1 tablespoon of the blackstrap molasses. Again, don't need to use too much, just use what the recipe calls for. Do that. And again, you don't want this to be cold, you want it to be on the warm side, so that way it'll dissolve a lot easier in the water and you can mix it quite a bit easier. I'm just going to go ahead and take the whole spoon and the stir stick, combine them there, and just stir them around because it's a little bit sticky. That's one thing about molasses, it tends to stick to everything. So when you get it on your hands, you'll definitely need to go out and wash them. So let's just do a couple minutes of stirring to make sure that's completely dissolved in our water before we move on to the next step. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to carefully reintroduce our little concentrate mix here back into our gallon of water. And then once we do that, we can let it sit for just a few minutes to make sure everything combines. You can also take it, if you've got it inside of a container like this, and you can just shake it and make sure that it's well combined. You don't want any clumping of the molasses or not in failure to mix. So just shake it for anywhere from 30 to 40 seconds to make sure that it's completely mixed well before you move on to actually applying it to your tomato plants or whatever else you're transplanting in the garden. Now there's always a lot of questions that pop up with the formulas I'm using, and one of the most common is about timing. When is the best time to do this? I would recommend early morning or late afternoon, and you want to add this about anywhere from 10 to 30 minutes after you've transplanted it, whether you're going from a small seedling up to a larger plant that you may have bought at a garden center. So just remember, we don't want to do this in the middle of the day. Early morning, I'd say before 10 or 11, before the sun's come up and the heat has started, or late afternoon, probably after maybe 5 p.m., 6 p.m., depending on how long your days are and how hot it's been. So again, I would avoid that midday extreme heat, and then you can apply it. And we're not applying this to the leaves. We're only doing this as a soil drench out away from the stem of the plant. So we don't want to do any burning of the plant because there is the apple cider vinegar, some of the other ingredients. So remember, just around the root zone of the plant once you've transplanted within that short amount of time. Now the next most common question that I've been getting a lot is, can it be stored? Can you store this for a long period of time? No, I'm recommending that all the formulas I'm putting together, use them immediately and use them full. So don't over mix, don't make large batches if you can't use it right away, because it does lose potency over time. Now I wanted to bring you back out in the garden some of these newly transplanted tomatoes. Remember, we're trying to avoid watering directly on the stem. We want to pour anywhere from 1 to 2 cups around the root zone like that. We want to focus on that area and not the leaves, so we're avoiding putting this on any leaves. For larger plants, you can go up to 3 to 4 cups. So if you bought a really large plant at your garden center, I would bump this up from, what we said, 1 to 2 cups. I would go to 3 to 4 cups on a really large plant that you may have purchased from your garden center. So remember, something like this, I'm doing roughly about 1 cup. Seedlings, maybe just a few ounces if it's really small, if you're starting out. But this time of year, most people are starting the larger plants. Now generally you're going to do this once. This is not going to be a repeated thing. You're just going to do this when you first transplant it and then leave it alone. If your tomatoes are showing signs of weakness, stress, or yellowing, then you can do it again 7 days later, and then after that should be fine. So I'm just recommending this just as you transplant, whether you've grown them from seed yourself and you're now taking them out to your garden, or you've purchased some tomatoes at your local garden center and you're either upsizing to a larger container or you're putting it in your raised beds or your open vegetable garden, just remember once during, right when we're transplanting, but not a repeated thing over and over each week unless the plant is showing a lot of signs of stress, and that's what the B vitamin is doing, is preventing transplant shock. Now this is a really healthy tomato plant, but it's really too small of a pot to leave it in there, so this will be transplanted eventually. But since I've done this treatment initially when I transplanted it as a small seedling into this pot, no yellowing, no signs of stress, and no problems with it, so it's looking great. Right here on the screen I'm going to put what to expect anywhere from your first planting 24 hours up to a few weeks later. So within 24 to 48 hours, you're going to see reduced wilting and your leaves are going to begin to stabilize. You're going to see less, well, you may not see the root stress diseases, but they will be less. Now within 3 to 7 days, new root hairs begin forming. There's going to be noticeable improvement in the plant vigor, and there's going to be less yellowing or drooping. Now 1 to 2 weeks, you're going to see stronger top growth, faster establishment in soil, and improved nutrient uptake. Now another thing I want to talk about is if you want to see this all as a PDF, I'll put it in my Patreon. You can sign up there and download it, and that way you can have it on your device. So if you're out in the garden, you can pull it up again and you can have the recipe right there. A lot of the recipes I do include a PDF and then put it in the Patreon. Not all of them, but a lot of them I do that, so you can at least pull it up later and you'll have a quick, easy reference there. Some of them I may have missed along the way because I'm juggling so many things around the greenhouse and the garden, and I need to go back and add every single recipe to my Patreon. So guys, if you want to take a look there, you can really help the channel. Now let's move on to some of the ingredients and why they work so well. So let me go through these 3 items right here and explain to you why each one works so well in this recipe. Your B vitamins, especially your B1 or your thiamine, they're going to help reduce transplant shock signals in plants. It's going to stimulate root cell division, and it's going to improve the metabolic processes during stressful times when the plant is growing. This is also going to support enzymes and activity therein tied to the root development. Now next I want to talk just for a sec about the molasses. This is a microbial fuel source in the soil, so this really enriches your soil. This has a lot of natural sugars, iron, and trace minerals. It's going to feed those soil microbes. It's going to break down nutrients into plant available forms, and also it's going to improve the soil texture and enhance the root symbiosis. So as far as the apple cider vinegar goes, that's going to help unlock some of the nutrients that are already in the soil, such as calcium, phosphorus, and other micronutrients. Also, it's going to help prevent minor transplant related root stagnation. Now I'm going to give you some master gardening tips for using this. I would say that if you're going to use this, try to do it on a day when you're kind of have a lot more clouds in the sky, because an extremely bright, intense day, it may not work quite as well as an overcast day. There's a scientific reason for that, but if we don't want to turn this into a 30 to 40 minute video, I'll just say that's my best advice there on application. If you can do it, and it's not going to harm it if you do it on a sunny day, but for better results, do it on a cloudy day. Now I often talk about black cow compost, and each year I add anywhere from 3 to 6 bags to each one of my garden beds, because there's a certain amount of settling. The rain throughout the winter can get some of the minerals and other really rich things that are in the soil, can kind of leach it out a little bit. So I always add fresh bags of black cow. If you can't get that where you live, I'll put a link in the description to a smaller size bag, but they are kind of cost prohibitive because they are quite heavy. So just remember, adding composted manure to each one of your either pots or beds makes a huge difference, because you want to kind of revitalize the soil that your tomatoes growing in. And if you're growing it in open ground, just adding some of the black cow to the hole, just a cup or 2, makes a huge difference as well. Now there's another thing you can add to this, and this is completely optional, but if you really want the maximum effect of this recipe, you can use some of the mycorrhizal fungi. You can get them sometimes in liquids, sometimes in powders. You can add that to the soil. If you've ever flipped over a log or something grow in the yard and something you see white growing there, that's a lot of times those beneficial fungi that are in the soil. Sometimes when you dig your soil up, you might see some of that there. So adding that to the soil really works well with our already existing recipe, and it can give you even stronger results. Now there's 5 critical mistakes that some people make when they're making the formula and adding it to their tomatoes, cucumbers, peppers, whatever they're growing. I'm going to put that on screen right here, and that way you can just pause the video and take a look at it. I'm trying to keep this video as close to 10 minutes as possible, so just pause it and take a quick look there. So this simple recipe makes a huge difference when you're transplanting. Whenever you're disturbing the roots of your tomatoes or peppers, whatever you're growing, it can do damage to them, and you'll see an instant negative result sometimes, especially if you're going through a really hot or dry time of year. If you haven't had any rain, we're in an unusually dry spring right now, which is quite unusual. Our springs are a little bit wetter than now, so it's an ideal time to add it to each plant as you plant them in the ground. And remember, once when you plant it, wait 7 days. If you're still seeing signs of stress for whatever reason, then you can go ahead and add the same amount again a second time. And again, I wouldn't store this. I would just use it all up at one time, and then that way it has its full potency. So guys, everything I use in all videos, I try to find the best priced item and things that I personally use, and I link it in the description so you can take a look there. Also, if you really want to help the channel, subscribing and give me a thumbs up really helps. It won't cost you anything to do that. If you want to help the channel to its maximum amount, I have a Patreon. You can become a member there for as little as $5 and download all types of PDFs and see some extra content as well. So guys, I really appreciate you watching, and have a great day.